The Raiders were starting to look dangerous. The offensive line was improving, Jeanty was building serious momentum, and everything seemed to be lining up for a breakout season. Then came the hit nobody in Las Vegas wanted to see. Jeanty went down at practice with an ankle injury, and suddenly the entire outlook of the Raiders' offense changed. Before we dive in, smash that subscribe button if you want the fastest NFL updates on the planet. Because this isn't just about losing a running back for a few games. Jeanty was becoming one of the biggest pieces of what the Raiders wanted to do offensively. And now, the team may have to survive anywhere from 2 to 8 weeks without him. So how serious is this setback? And can Mike Washington actually keep the offense moving while Jeanty is gone? Let's break it down. Coming into this season, expectations around Jeanty were getting louder and louder. The young running back had already earned a spot on the 2026 breakout team, and his training camp only made the hype stronger. He wasn't simply having a quiet camp and waiting for the regular season. He was making plays. During joint practices with the Houston Texans, Jeanty showed that he could handle himself against a strong starting defense. That kind of performance was exactly what Raiders fans wanted to see. Then, in one practice, everything changed. Jeanty suffered an ankle sprain. The good news is that the injury is not considered season-ending. That's massive. There is no reason right now to assume his season is finished. But there is also no firm return date. The possible timeline being discussed stretches from roughly 2 weeks all the way to 8 weeks. And that uncertainty is the scary part. If he's back quickly, the Raiders may only have to survive a short stretch. If the injury keeps him out for much longer, Las Vegas could be forced to redesign a major part of its offensive plan. And that's where Mike Washington suddenly becomes extremely important. But here's the question Raiders fans need to answer. Can Washington actually carry enough of the workload to keep this offense dangerous? Because when you watch his tape, the answer isn't simply yes or no. There are things he does really well. And there are also clear limitations. Let's get one thing straight. Washington isn't Jeanty. And that's not an insult. Most backup running backs aren't as complete as the starter they're replacing. That's just how football works. But Washington does have something the Raiders desperately need right now. Speed. He's already been getting meaningful work during training camp and preseason action, so the timing of Jeanty's injury could have been much worse. Washington isn't being thrown onto the field after doing nothing for a month and suddenly being asked to carry an NFL offense. He's been preparing. He's been taking representatives. He's been running in the system. That matters. Still, when you study his carries, one weakness stands out immediately. Washington doesn't consistently make defenders miss in space. And at the NFL level, that can turn a potentially big run into a short gain. Take a toss play. The offensive line is using zone blocking principles, and the right guard works toward the second level. Washington gets the ball and eventually finds himself with a linebacker sitting in space. That's exactly the matchup a running back wants. One defender. Open space. Room to make something happen. But instead of attacking the linebacker at an angle and forcing him to miss, Washington runs directly into the tackle. That's the kind of play Jeanty might turn into something bigger. Washington doesn't. And that difference matters. But don't write him off yet. Because there's another side to his game. This is where the evaluation gets interesting. Washington isn't necessarily the type of running back who can take a broken play and magically turn it into a 40-yard gain. But give him a clean running lane, and suddenly his speed becomes a serious weapon. We've seen that repeatedly. On another zone concept, Washington bends the run toward the outside. A defender is waiting in space, and once again, the big question is whether Washington can beat him one-on-one. This time, his speed gives him a chance. NFL linebackers aren't slow. These guys can fly. Washington still manages to get around the edge, keep his balance, and finish the run. That's important. Because if a running back can reach the corner against NFL defenders, there's always a chance that one of those runs turns into something much bigger. And Washington has shown that ability. The Raiders don't need him to become Jeanty overnight. They need him to maximize what the blocking gives him. That's a much more realistic expectation. And there were several plays where he did exactly that. On inside zone runs, the offensive line creates enough movement for Washington to find small openings. He doesn't need every carry to become spectacular. Sometimes 4 yards is a win. Sometimes 5 yards is exactly what an offense needs. Those ordinary gains keep the offense on schedule, create manageable downs, and eventually open the door for explosive plays. And Washington showed that he can deliver those runs. But then we get to the play that really shows what he can do when everything comes together. The Raiders run another inside zone concept. The blockers are moving defenders. The linebackers are accounted for. The line of scrimmage is finally creating a clean path. Washington sees the opening and doesn't hesitate. He hits it. Then he gets into space. And now the defense has a problem. One safety gets a chance to make the play. Washington makes him miss. Then comes the stiff arm. And suddenly a normal-looking running play becomes an explosive gain. That's the version of Washington the Raiders need to see. Not the running back who creates something out of nothing every single time. The runner who understands where the opening is and has the acceleration to punish a defense when the offensive line does its job. And that leads to a very important point. If the Raiders' offensive line continues improving, Washington could be much more effective than people expect. That's because his skill set fits certain concepts particularly well. He's dangerous when he can stretch a defense horizontally, get toward the edge, and use his speed. He isn't necessarily trying to run through every defender. He's trying to get around them. And when the blocking creates that opportunity, things can happen quickly. This is where losing Jeanty could hurt the Raiders the most. Washington can catch the football. He can be used on screens. He can handle checkdowns. He can line up as an outlet for the quarterback. That's useful. But Jeanty gives the offense another dimension. The threat of a talented running back can completely change how a defense reacts to play action. Think about what happens when linebackers have to respect the run. They hesitate. They step forward. And that tiny reaction can create space behind them. That's where Brock Bowers becomes incredibly dangerous. The Raiders were building an offense where Jeanty and Bowers could constantly force defenses to make difficult decisions. Load up against the run? You risk opening space for the passing game. Back off to protect against Bowers? Now Jeanty can attack the defense on the ground. That's the nightmare scenario the Raiders wanted. And that's why Jeanty's injury feels so frustrating. It's not only about his rushing yards. It's about everything his presence does to the defense. Now I want to hear from Raiders fans. If Jeanty misses several weeks, should Las Vegas trust Mike Washington to handle the job? Or should the team seriously consider adding another running back? Drop your answer in the comments. And don't just say Washington. Tell me why. Because this decision could have a major impact on the Raiders' offense. There is still a reason for optimism. Jeanty's injury is not being described as season-ending. That's huge. If the shorter end of the recovery timeline becomes reality, the Raiders could potentially get their young running back after missing only a limited stretch. And if the timeline pushes toward the longer end, Washington has already shown enough to give this team a legitimate option. That's better than having no answer at all. The Raiders also have time to adjust. They can lean more heavily on the running game when the matchup makes sense. They can use Washington's speed. They can get him involved as a receiver. They can use screens. They can mix in different blocking concepts. Most importantly, they don't have to ask Washington to be something he's not. Let him attack space. Let him use his acceleration. Let the offensive line create opportunities. And if the line continues to improve, Washington could surprise some people. But make no mistake, the Raiders still want Jeanty back as soon as possible. Because the ceiling of this offense is higher with him on the field. ## the Raiders' real problem. The biggest concern isn't that Washington is terrible. He isn't. The concern is that Jeanty looked like a player who could change the offense. He was having the kind of training camp that gets fans excited for September. He was showing up against quality competition. He was building confidence. And the Raiders were starting to imagine what this offense could look like with Jeanty carrying the football and Bowers attacking defenses through the air. Now they have to wait. 2 weeks. Maybe. 8 weeks. Possibly. Nobody knows for sure yet. And that uncertainty is exactly why this story matters. The Raiders don't need to panic. They need to be smart. Washington has speed. He has experience in the current system. He's been getting representatives, and has already shown that when the blocking is good, he can turn a small opening into a big play. But he also has limitations. He won't consistently make defenders miss in the open field. He isn't the same type of runner as Jeanty. And expecting him to completely replace Jeanty would be unrealistic. The goal isn't to replace Jeanty. The goal is to survive until Jeanty can return. That's the mission. If Washington can give the Raiders steady production, protect the football, hit the open lanes, and create a few explosive plays, this offense can survive the setback. And when Jeanty finally comes back, that's when things could get really interesting. Because imagine having both backs healthy, with Brock Bowers creating problems in the passing game and an improved offensive line opening running lanes. That could still become the offense Raiders fans were hoping to see. For now, though, the waiting game begins. Jeanty is out. Washington gets his opportunity. And Raiders fans are about to find out whether the backup can keep the machine moving until the starter returns. One thing is certain. This isn't the ending to the Jeanty story. It's the next test for the Raiders. And if Washington passes it, Las Vegas may discover that its running back depth is stronger than anyone expected.